the same thing over again. And that's one of the reasons why our country is set up the way it is. And I'm going to make my stand right here. And, like I've told y'all before, I'm a Christian. My faith is Christianity. And I believe that this country shares common values, within ourselves, and there is nowhere else to go. We've got to get corruption out. The sad part about it is most corruption is not individuals, it's organized crime, and that's the sad and scary part about what's going on. I also would like to say this. I think as the Tea Party grows, and I wanted to get this young lady's opinion on this, as the Tea Party grows, the establishment and the elite, I think, is going to simply shift gears. I think they're one step ahead of us. I don't think Barack Obama is going to run for re-election. Hillary Clinton's already talking about being the next president. Barack Obama can't keep hands out of the United Nations. I think he wants to be the Secretary General. And I think that the elite in this country that are running this thing, this is the corrupt part of it, they're going to throw their weight behind the UN. I think it's already set up like that. I think the way it works is the cards are dealt face up. The devil's dealing the cards. People that are a jack know they're a jack. People that are a queen know they're a queen. People that know they're a 10 know they're a 10. And they don't cross paths. They don't mess with each other. If you're a 2, you don't mess with a 3. And anyhow, I'd just like to get your opinion. Where do you think it's going? I know I heard you say maybe, it is too late. But that's just my opinion on what I see happening right now. And anyhow, I'll let you answer it if you can.
Sure, and thanks for calling in. I actually agree with you. I do not think Obama is going to run for a second term. I'm not, but then again, I'm not exactly sure why he won't be running for a second term. And I think that's important to talk about because I think that there may not be an election in 2012. And as much as I hate to say that, and that's, maybe considered a pretty radical view, I think that this country might be in such a state of emergency that there will be no election that year. And I think that's entirely possible. If you look at Venezuela, what has happened in Venezuela, and maybe Griff could talk about this a little more. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez has managed to stay in power far longer than his term required. And he was even in charge of making a ton of amendments to their constitution. And now their constitution allows him to stay in power for a very long time. So it's something that is, most people look at America and they say, well, that could never happen here. And I ask the question, why not? Why couldn't that happen here? If it could happen in another democratic republic with a constitutional government, why couldn't that happen here? Because we're seeing a lot of the same things going on in this country that Venezuela experienced, back before Hugo Chavez became president. Not only that, going to your point on expatriates, and this is another law that I think is pretty irrelevant. It's on the Secretary of State's website. You can go and look it up. But it basically says if a person decides to expatriate from this country based on tax reasons, that the federal government will still try to hunt you down and collect taxes from you 10 years after you're gone. So it just goes to show you how far our government will go to overstep its boundaries and try to maintain control over people no matter where they go. And that's got to be disconcerting to some people.
Well, most of the laws that are being wrote right now are coming down from the United Nations. I mean, we're seeing deindustrialization and all of these environmental laws and Obama's cap and trade and carbon tax. It's all UN. I mean, you can go to the United Nations, and look up the stuff. I know of an individual that's already specializing in UN law and how it trickles down to the United States. Are you aware of that?
I am absolutely aware of it, and not only that, but a lot of the UN's mandates and the language contained in their conventions is actually very inconsistent with our Constitution. For example, if you read some of the documents that come out of the UN, those documents talk about how there is no right to private property. Now, how on earth is that consistent with our Constitution, where people are supposed to have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which has been interpreted as a person's ability to own private property? Now, if we start going the route of the UN, which is extremely disturbing to someone like me, then we could very well find ourselves in a situation where we end up without the right to own private property. Now, there's been this talk about fascism and communism, and I'd like to just go ahead and make a distinction if I could. Fascism is a nationalized form of socialism, and it's a system where people say that our rights originate from government. They don't originate from a creator or some other sort of divine being or energy or whatever you'd like to call it. And so, in effect, people start revering and looking to the government, having faith in the government to provide for their needs. They don't look to something higher than themselves other than the government. Now, communism is international socialism. So whereas fascism implements socialism on a national level, communism implements it on an international level. Now, what's interesting is there was an IMF report that was written and put out on April 10th of this year. And in this IMF report, they talk about implementing a global tax and a global currency called the Bancor. Now, in this report, they were criticizing the American currency for being a fiat currency. But what's interesting about it is they actually proposed no plan whatsoever as to how the Bancor would not also be a fiat currency other than to state that it would be supported by collateral. Now, what exactly is collateral? Well, collateral is something that can be used to secure the value of the money. In other words, land, natural resources, infrastructure, manufacturing plants, things of that nature. And so if you've got a system like that, and the system is owned collectively and used as collateral, then that leaves absolutely no room at all for private property ownership. And that's actually my big concern if there is something like going to some sort of world government or what have you.
That's very, very interesting. And wow, what valuable information, folks. And Brian, thank you so much for the call. I'm going to move along to the next caller, Jack from Oregon. You're live on Bridging the Gap.
Thanks for taking my call.
No problem, sir.
I just wanted to compliment Margo. I could go on for half an hour. She is so right on with what some of the things that I know to be true. I had, just to be brief, I had one question. I thought there was an amendment to the Constitution, I don't know, way back when, that prohibited members of the judiciary from being in the legislative or executive branch of government because there was a conflict of interest. Would you comment on that, please? And I'll take the answer off air. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. Absolutely, except it wasn't really a constitutional amendment. What you're talking about is actually found in some of the very first 3 articles of the Constitution, where you have to have a separation of powers. So under Article 1, you've got the legislative branch. Article 2, you've got the executive branch. And Article 3, you have the judicial branch. Now, you cannot intermingle jobs in between those branches because you're going to end up with a situation where you're starting to, I guess, violate that separation of powers. So, for instance, if you've got someone that's a sitting member of Congress and then they get nominated to the Supreme Court, they must first finish out their term in Congress before they can sit on the Supreme Court. And so the same thing arose earlier this year, with the whole C-stack. They must first finish out their term in Congress.
Oh, well, we lost Margo. Are you there?
Yes, I think I'm here. Am I here?
Okay. Yeah, well, I lost you for a second, and I'm sorry if I interrupted you, but all of a sudden everything went silent.
No problem. So you run into the same situation like you had with Joe C-stack, where he actually couldn't constitutionally take that offer to sit in the executive branch because he was serving currently in the legislative branch. And so that would have been a separation of powers issue.
Well, I think
that's what the caller was talking about.
I think he may have been alluding to the fact that if the person is an attorney, they can't run for office, and the Constitution won't let them because of the conflict of interest. So to get around it, the powers that be created the 13th and 14th Amendment, which created the U.S. citizen, which now allowed these attorneys to be able to take office, because now they're not sovereign Americans. They're actually U.S. citizens. They're actually corporate fiduciaries.
Well, what do you think about that, Margo?
Well, that makes perfect sense to me also, because I would think whenever we get sworn into the bar and you become a licensed attorney, you basically become an officer of the court. And if you're an officer of a court, then you're actually a member of the judicial branch of government. So basically, if you're a member of the judicial branch of government, then yes, technically you would not be able to run for office and serve in the legislature because, again, that would violate the separation of powers. So I think that they've put a lot of professional responsibility rules on us as far as attorneys running for office and stuff like that. And I just have to agree with John on a moral level that I just really don't think it's right. So, I would never run for office as an attorney. I think if you are an attorney and you're considering running for office, then you need to go inactive with your status with the bar, at the very least.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good moral stance. Now, Griff, before we run out of time, I think you owe us a story.
Yeah, I want to hear the story.
I've got two questions for Margo. we may have to put the story off until next time because
I'm going to have my head chopped off by a lot of listeners if you put that story off. I'm just telling you right now.
Margo, I want to ask you, is yes or no, just yes or no, is there a true separation between the church and the government? Yes or
no? There never has been.
There is no separation. The government owns the church. The government owns the church. The land, the building, the operation, the tax status, and also through the marriages. The minister becomes an agent of government when he marries people. And then,
isn't that what happens when you become 801c3? Isn't that what happens?
It's 501c3.
Or 501, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and that's also why I advocate that we actually shouldn't really have the federal government be involved in marriage laws at all.
Well, the government prohibits churches from marrying people without the government license and the permits and the oath and all of the government ceremony first, and then the government can do a second ceremony, or the church can do a second ceremony. Why do the people keep saying separation of church and state when they're there in fact never has been separation.